Hi, my name is Tristan Skipper. I'm a current student at the University of Louisville, and this is my final project for my racism and sexism class. For this project, I interviewed Black men of different ages about their personal experiences with racial profiling and how systemic racism has affected their lives. These are their stories. Today, I'm here with my brother Jordan, who is 29 years old from Springfield, Ohio. He currently works for Springfield City School District as a substitute teacher. Today, I'm going to be asking him a few questions for my final project in my racism and sexism class. Question one: can you recall a time where you were treated with suspicion or hostility in a public place simply because you're a parent? How did that moment affect your self perception or sense of safety?
Yes, I can remember a time um, just where I was treated suspicious because of the color of my skin. I remember being a college student um, in the car, me and my roommate, both just cruising. We were actually coming from doing laundry. Um, and we were at a stoplight, and we look over next to us, and it happened to be a police car. Um, the windows were down, there was no music playing. Like, no reason at all for them to be suspicious of us in any way, shape, or form. And as soon as the light turned green and we went through the light, they flashed their lights and pulled us over. Um, they were harassing us about drugs being in the car. Um, we both had our hands up and they asked us to step out of the car. And I just remember in the end, he told me he pulled me over because he could not see what state my license plate was from because it wasn't Texas. We were in Houston, Texas. I don't know if I said that. So I had Ohio plates and my license plate cover, which was just black. He said he couldn't see what state my license plate was from, and that's why they pulled me over.
Question two: how has your experience with law enforcement shaped your views on justice and fairness in America?
Um, I haven't had many experiences with law enforcement, but I will say I've seen both the good and bad side of it. Like I just said in question one, I have been harassed for absolutely nothing. And um, also, I've had run ins with police officers who were very kind and genuine. So I've seen both sides of it. I know that it happens. We all see it on TV. It's a big topic of discussion today. Um, and just not knowing really which officer, which version of the officer you'll get, whether they're on their way to your driver's side window because you're being pulled over, or whether you are maybe in the wrong and you just made a mistake. So,
Question three: have you ever felt the need to change your speech, dress, or mannerism to avoid being stereotyped or profiled? What does that say about your freedom of expression in your life?
yes, I think being black in America, we have all done that before at some point in our lives, whether we changed our tone of voice or maybe even the way that you say something. Um, my appearance, not so much. Maybe like being self conscious about your hairstyle or something like that, but that's pretty much all I would. Um, that's all I would have to say is that at some point or another, you will have to change your speech or maybe the way you dress or the way you say something, just for your own benefit. You never know what somebody's going to think about you, and your first impression is everything. So, yeah.
Well, thank you for your time, Jordan, and also answering my questions for my final project as well.
Thank you.
So my next interview is with my stepfather, Kent, a 51-year-old barber and business owner of Fresta Barbershop from Springfield, Ohio. Today I'm going to ask questions for our final project in my racism and sexism class. So the first question would be, can you recall a time when you were treated with suspicion or hostility in a public place simply because of your appearance? How did that moment affect your self-perception or sense of safety?
Let me see. I recall, well, one time when I was in Cleveland, I was with my whole family, my mother, my father, my son, and my brother were all in one rental car, and we got pulled over. And they asked for everybody's IDs in the car. My dad wasn't really comfortable with it, and we didn't think that they needed everybody's IDs. Which is kind of funny how they pulled us over because it really was for something very small. I think it was for like maybe a rolling stop sign or something very small. But because I believe it was the car was full and we were all black people in the car, I think they kind of wanted to just kind of investigate what was going on. So just the way that the pullover happened and how he was questioning us. And my dad was actually videotaping, and it really got under the guy's skin as far as the police officer that was asking for our IDs. He really didn't want to be on tape. So that was the one of the times that kind of stand out to me. I kind of felt like nothing really came of it, but it was just the fact that they asked us for our IDs, everybody in the car, and really the only person's ID that they can really supposed to ask for is the drivers.
Number two, how has your experience with law enforcement shaped your views on justice and fairness in America?
Um, my views on law enforcement, my experience. How has your experience with law enforcement shaped your views? My experience hasn't been a lot of negativity, but it's more from observing other black men's experience with law enforcement that's kind of shaped my views on justice and fairness in America, and knowing the history of where policing kind of started, um, as far as its connection to slavery, and how people used to basically it was people that used to come to get their slaves and bring them back down south. It's kind of one of the places where policing started, and also because of they didn't really want black people or free black people to have guns. And that was another part of the policing thing that has shaped my views. And do I think it's uh, shaped my views on justice and fairness? Well, fairness is obviously it's not fair because it was based on, what I'm saying, out of the slavery times and that type of stuff. And I guess I could go into like mass incarceration, but that's a whole nother story, really. But that's another part of the something that's shaped my views on justice in America is um, the mass incarceration situation.
Okay. Question three, have you ever felt the need to change your speech, dress, or mannerism to avoid being stereotyped or profiled? What does that say about freedom of expression in your life?
Um, I definitely have felt the need to change my speech, dress, and mannerisms to avoid being stereotyped. I just it kind of goes along with being black in America. It's kind of I think they have a term for it called code switching, being able to kind of switch depending on who you're talking to, and if you're trying to get a job, or if you're trying to get your car fixed, or if you're trying to do certain things, if you're trying to be on the golf course, all those things have to be. You have to adjust how you speak, and uh, kind of it kind of goes to what your audience is and who you're talking to. So definitely, if you're in an all white environment, You're not going to want to sound like you just came off the streets. Um, so it's it. I don't look at it as a something that has curtailed my freedom. You know what I'm saying? As far as my expression, I just think that it's caused me to have to be more flexible and more able to change my vocabulary, dress, and mannerisms to kind of match the situation to make it turn out the best for me.
Well, well, thank you for your time, Kent, and also answering these questions for my final project as well.
No problem. Appreciate you.
Okay, today I'm here with my friend Anthony, who is 19 years old from Dayton, Ohio. His current occupation is a real estate agent. Today I'm going to ask him a few questions for my final project in my racism and sexism class. So, for my first question, can you recall a time when you were treated with suspicion or hostility in a public place, in a public space, simply because you're a parent? How did that moment affect your self perception or sense of safety?
Um, when we did a high school prank for our senior prank, we had to sit in the office while the white kids that were also a part of the prank could go to class and roam the school freely. And that was just very a hostile moment. What was the like question? How does it affect what?
Um, how did that moment? How did that moment affect your self perception or sense of safety?
Self perception or sense of safety? Mm, I wouldn't say it affected either. It just like showed me like I don't know. It just showed me how we get treated differently just because of our skin color. That's all.
Okay. For number two, how has your experience with law enforcement shaped your views on justice and fairness in America?
One late night, I was door dashing. I want to say uh, it was like 3 in the morning or going on 3. I was in like downtown Dayton on like the west side, and it I got pulled over, but they were following me for like a mile before they pulled me over. They definitely ran my tags, and then like they were waiting on me to mess up or do something. And then as soon as I did like a little thing, they pulled me over, and they asked me like, did I hear gunshots? But I was just door dashing, and they basically only asked me that question because I was black. They thought I was up to some criminal activity.
Okay. For number three, have you ever felt the need to
That
change your? Oh wait, you
my
want to keep
bad.
going?
Yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
my bad. I had to interrupt you real fast. That just showed me like you can't really trust what the police be on because they be bored and be nosy and just not doing right by the people, white or black, but mainly black. What's the next question?
Next question is: have you ever felt the need to change your speech, dress, or mannerism to avoid being stereotyped or profiled? What does that say about freedom of expression in your life?
Mm, I don't think I've had to like change my like speech or like the way I dress. It's more of being like professional in what you do. That's more of a thing that I would say. I like depending on my race or anything, I haven't had to change the way I like speak. Like it's just like a manners thing for real. Dress, not really. I kind of dress the same no matter what. Or like if I know I gotta like dress up a little bit to look professional for like an appointment or like showing a house or something, then it's gonna gain clients. So of course I'm gonna dress more professional. That's about it. Nothing else.
Okay.
on Wednesday.
Well, thank you for answering my questions for my final project, and that's it.
All right, y'all have a good day.
Is that what you're saying?
So now you're starting over?
So my next question, I'm going to focus on the first question that revolves around being treated suspicious or hostile in a public space. So let me start by kind of sharing the story with you, and then kind of tell you how it made me feel. So a long time ago, I think I was probably about 16 or so, which was a really long time ago. So I remember a friend of mine lived out of town, and he invited a group of us from his hometown over for a long weekend to hang out and have a good time. Again, I think we were maybe 15 or 16 at the time. We might have been 15 now I think about it, because we weren't driving. So we all, came up, hung out. Well, an individual within the community was actually having a house party. And we decided to go over to the house party. My friend was invited to the house party. I want to say there was about 7 of us in total, if I remember correct. 2 of us being African American, the other 5 being white. That will play into the story for sure at a later point. So I remember showing up to the house party. It was probably maybe, I don't know, let's say 30 people or so, and probably about 17 of them were females, and the rest were all males. But everybody at the party was white. We were the only, the two of us were the only 2 African Americans at the party. And I remember, walking into the party, and I remember the females of the party, approaching us and talking to us and asking us, where we live and where we're from, and just kind of really having casual conversations. And I remember once those casual conversations started, I remember the gentleman who was hosting the party and the guys at the party, having a lot of animosity towards us as African Americans. And there wasn't anything said that I heard, but I do remember them having a lot of animosity, to a point where my friend that was invited to the party actually, said, "Hey, we should go. We should leave." So I remember, leaving the party, and I remember, getting in the car. I think there might have been one of us that could drive, and I think we were all in the same car, kind of piled in the car. And I remember my friend telling me that, the guy had called us a name that not going to repeat, the 2 of us African-American gentlemen. And I remember, leaving the party and wanting to go back into the party and discuss the matter amongst us gentlemen, on the word that the gentleman used to describe us. And my friend that was invited to the party knew that wasn't a good idea for us to go in there, because it would have been bad news for the individuals in the party. So we made a choice to leave the party. And I remember, we left the party and we went back to my friend's house. And my friend received a phone call, and the kid from on the phone call was the individual who lived at the house that the house party was at. And he accused us of stealing something from him, right? And he specifically identified us as the African American kids were the ones that stole something. And I remember, my friend, telling him that it wasn't us, and kind of hanging up the phone. And then my friend's mother actually calling the parents that lived at the house and telling them that, it wasn't us. There was no way that we were the people who did that and whatever. Well, it actually turned into some, prank phone calls, and the kids, threatening to come over and do something to us, and all, this type of things that, teenagers do. Push comes to shove, the kids were a whole lot of talk. Lucky for them, they actually made a choice to not come over. But the following day, the parent actually called my buddy's friend or my buddy's parents, and actually let them know that they figured out who stole the property, and it wasn't us. It was, a local person that lived down the street from them. So I do share that story because I think that is a very clear example of hostile treatment, and hostile treatment based off of, how we look and what people made assumptions off of, our behavior and where we were from and all other kind of silly stuff. How did that make me feel? I didn't feel unsafe. The one thing that I kind of really take near and dear to my heart, that I don't automatically make the assumption that it's because how I look when I receive treatment that's less than standard. Because there's a lot of ignorant people in the world, a lot of ignorant people in the world, and you just don't know the baseline on why people are mistreating you. But I do think in that situation, it was a really unfortunate situation. And I think those kids learned a valuable lesson about making assumptions and assuming because we were the only African-American kids there that we were the people that stole whatever the item was. I don't remember what it was. It was something immaterial. If it was someone's jacket or something to that point, something to that point is what they said. I didn't feel like there was not a feeling of sense of lack of safety at any point in time. The one thing I can say, I'll give people advice to make sure that you always have, people in your corner that you can trust. And all of my friends that were there at the time, had my back and I had theirs. And there wasn't any point in time that we felt unsafe in that situation. And it didn't really change my perception. One thing I've learned, throughout my time when you deal with situations where people aren't kind or polite or nice or they're just being haters, I drive power from hate. So when people aren't polite, when they aren't nice, when they aren't kind, when they aren't caring, when they're not giving me the benefit of the doubt, that just makes me ramp up all of those characteristics in my repertoire. I feel like it's really important to kill people with kindness. And it's often disarming when someone's mean to you and you're nice to them. They don't know how to take you. And I think that's the most important thing. So in closing and answering this question, I do think it's really important that as African Americans that we step back. I've always imposed for myself to step back. And before I make the assumption that it's because how I look, if you don't tell me blatantly that I'm treating you different because how I look, I kind of look and think outside the box on maybe what else is going on. Maybe they're having a bad day, maybe they're sick, maybe their mother's dying, maybe their dog got hit by a car. I just really try to keep an open mind and really kind of give people a lot of empathy. And again, I just want to really focus on the point. There were zero safety concerns when it came to those kids and their behavior. If anything, I was concerned for their safety if they came over to deal with us. Thank you. I'll go to answer the next question. Good evening. My name is Booker. My age is 44. And my occupation is business operations and finance. So the question I'm going to pick to answer today is question number 2 about how my experience with law enforcement has shaped my view of justice and fairness in America. So I can tell you in my mid to late 20s, after I received my college education at the age of 21, I had a couple situations with law enforcement where they weren't kind, they weren't polite, they called me names like boy and stupid and asked me if I could read. And all of those occasions, I did not do anything. I was not issued a ticket, I was not issued a summons, I was not held in custody, none of those things. All of the situations stem from their assumptions of me, in my perspective as a young African-American man. Have those experiences changed my perspective of the justice system? So I actually had a neighbor who lived across the street from me in my old neighborhood, and he was a police sergeant for a very large police agency. And one day we were having a conversation about our experiences and I had shared with him my experiences with law enforcement. And a really great perspective that he provided with me was, he said, you know, Booker, every profession has individuals that aren't great at their job. You have accountants that aren't great. You have attorneys that aren't great. You have teachers that aren't great. You know, you have builders that aren't great. He said, unfortunately, the world focuses on the individuals that aren't great at their job. And unfortunately, those individuals are the ones that are a poor representation of law enforcement. So I can tell you, after those situations in my mid to early 20s, I've had nothing but positive experiences with law enforcement. And I really feel like those situations were representation of those individuals and their perception of me. One piece of advice I could give everybody is, you know, when you're sitting on the side of the road, it's not the time to debate or argue with law enforcement. One thing I learned in those situations was I had to be the individual to de-escalate the situation. And in every last one of those situations, I was polite, I was kind, I was nice, and that really disarmed them, and that allowed them to then lower, you know, their aggression towards me. In every last one of those situations, again, these situations are 20 plus years ago, before cell phones, before everybody had a camera, you know, before they were wearing body cameras. But in 2 of those 3 to 4 incidents, I did file internal affairs complaints on the police officers that mistreated me and called me outside of my name. So now let's talk about the fairness of the justice system. So just to give you a little bit of background on my profession. So my job revolves around details. It's my job to make sure the details are correct and accurate when it comes to what I do. And a lot of what I do, people come into my office, they need something, they want something, they tell me a story, and it's my job to really kind of identify if their story makes sense or not, and if what they're asking for is something that's needed. So I'm very detail oriented. You know, I take a lot of notes, I read a lot of body language, and I think I'm a really good judge of character, and I can also identify if someone's being dishonest or deceptive to me. So when it comes to like the fairness of the judicial system, so I've actually been called to jury duty 2 separate times, and I think that was probably when I was maybe in my late 20s, maybe early 30s. And, you know, the fairness of the judicial system revolves around being convicted or acquitted by a jury of your peers if it goes that far. The one thing I can tell you about when I had jury duty, I did not feel like the group of people were a representation of my peers. A lot of people did not want to be there. A lot of people did not pay attention to the details. A lot of people were not committed to doing the right thing. And a lot of people made assumptions. So I do think that it's really important for people to understand their rights and to know exactly when to exercise your right to silence, for silence. But the fairness of the judicial system I see is completely different than you know, my experiences with law enforcement, because once you get a better understanding of the legal system, you understand that the police officers that you interact with on the roadside, they're a part of the wheel of justice. They're not the only wheel of justice. So I do see those as 2 completely different things. So my interactions with law enforcement or police officers have not changed my opinion of the fairness of the judicial system. And one thing that we've noticed in the past 10 years is having body cams, having, you know, ring cameras, and then also having cell phones. A lot of data has been collected and debunked what police officers have put in their reports, you know, what they've said in open court. You know, there's a lot of information out there that I think that allows for a more fair system. It's not a perfect system. I really feel like it's far from perfect, but if there's anything that there's 2 kind of points that I would take away from this question. You know, number 1, if you ever interact with a law enforcement officer, it's your responsibility to de-escalate the situation. Number 2, it's your responsibility to also know your rights as a citizen of the United States. You know, watch a YouTube video, read up on what your roles and responsibilities are and what your rights are. And I think if you have a better understanding of what your rights are, when you're in that situation with a law enforcement officer, you're able to de-escalate the situation and communicate with confidence because you understand what they can or can't do to you. And if they do decide to do something to you that violates your rights, you're able to document it with your phone and you understand exactly what to do. So in closing on that question, I do see those as two separate points. Sorry I'm a little long-winded, but I wanted to make sure that I communicated all the details. Thank you. I'm going to go on to my next question. So for my final question, I'm going to pick, question number 3. Have I ever felt the need to change, my speech, my dress, or my mannerisms to avoid stereotypes or profiling? I'm a pretty basic person. I've had the same haircut for the past, I don't know, let's call it 30 years, maybe 35 years. I've had the same haircut. I'm a t-shirts and jeans type person. So I don't really think that I'm the best person to talk about, speech and dress, and I'm more of a mainstream dresser. But I will tell you a story that revolves around speech, dress, mannerisms, and stereotypes. So a couple weeks ago, a good friend of mine provided me with tickets to, a very exclusive event. In the exclusive event, we were also provided tickets to a very extremely exclusive area. The friend of mine that I decided to bring with me, he is also African American. So I remember, going to this exclusive event and asking an individual that was there, where is the entrance to this VIP room? And the individual that worked at the facility just looked at me and said, "You can't go in there." And I looked at him and said, "Okay, great, thank you. Where's the entrance?" And he said, "Well, you can't go in there." And I said, "I understand what you're saying, but do you mind telling me where the entrance is?" And he said, "Well, you can go in there if you have tickets." And he said, "Do you have tickets?" And I said, "I do." And he said, "Okay, great, sir, the entrance is over there." So we walk up to the entrance. 2 really nice ladies are there to greet us at the entrance along with a law enforcement officer. We walk up to the entrance. I greet them immediately with a smile. My friend greets them immediately with a smile in candor. And I'm like, "Hey, I'm here, for the VIP room. Where would you like me to scan my tickets?" The lady immediately asked me, "Hey, do you have 2 tickets?" I said, "Absolutely. I'll get both of them scanned." And she said, "Perfect." She said, "Let me get you guys your wristbands." They provided us with our wristbands and they told us to go and have a good time. So we proceeded to go up to the VIP area, and there were two different checkpoints of the VIP area. And I can tell you, both of the checkpoints, the individuals looked us up and down, left and right, until they witnessed our bracelet, and then they moved on and they said hello. Both of those individuals. So we get into the VIP area. One of the individuals in the VIP area is the spouse of the individual that's hosting this nationwide event with all of these individuals. Lo and behold, that we, in amongst probably 200 people, if not 250 people, were the only African Americans in this room. I mean, literally the only African Americans. So we proceeded to, sit down on the couch like everybody else and, have a beer and just enjoy ourselves for the evening. I share that story, or that part of that story was in the 2 to probably 3 hours that we were in that facility, interacting with the staff, interacting with some of the people that were in there with us. By the end, some of the staff members were, giving us fist bumps and shaking our hands and, and really asking us if we needed anything and really kind of like I think so, really taking a liking to us. And I do think, that's really a very shining example of it's really important for us to not make an assumptions that people are stereotyping us and putting us in a, maybe the way I would describe it is by putting guardrails around us by making assumptions. One thing I've learned is it disarms people when you kill them with kindness. Overall, 98% of the people that were in that facility were welcoming and nice, and maybe 2% of the people looked at us a specific way and didn't feel like we belong there, and that's okay. And that's okay. I'm looking forward to going back in future years, and I have a feeling that my friend and I will be welcomed back with open arms. It's just really important that you conduct yourself with a high level of integrity and treat people with respect and dignity. In that example, both my friend and I have professional careers. There was a specific dress code or a style that you had to, adhere to in order to get into this facility, because that's just how the facility is. It had nothing to do with us. My friend does have a non-traditional hairstyle, and I don't think, maybe initially that was something initially that maybe folks paid attention to, but once they got to know who we are and they recognized that we were good people, I think that was very disarming to them, and I think that's what made our experience, an extremely pleasant experience. I think it's totally fine for people to express your freedoms, with your style of dress and the way you want to wear your hair. I think it's other people's problem if they make assumptions about you. Other people's assumptions have nothing to do with you. And I do think it's extremely important that, when people make assumptions about me, it's my responsibility to make sure that they understand what's in my character. So in closing, even though that event had, 200 to 250 people that look like us, we didn't walk into the room like outsiders. We walked into the room like we own the room, right? And people recognized that confidence. People recognized our character, and they recognized our warm spirit. So I would suggest that if you're ever in a situation where you feel like people are treating you different, just be kind and nice. You'll disarm them. You'd be surprised how far a smile will go. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kevin E. Stone, age 54, based here in Detroit, Michigan. My occupation is Vice President of Creative Services for an advertising agency. The first question, can you recall a time where you were treated with suspicion, hostility in a public place simply because of your appearance? I can absolutely say yes to that. So there was a time when I was about 16, 17, with my younger brother. We were driving between Dayton, Ohio and Springfield, Ohio, and I think we were working on t-shirts or trying to do a t-shirt business or something like that. So we're on the highway, and I guess we were profiled. I guess at that time, people were wearing certain kind of hats and MCM hats and the cross colors and whatever it was. But I guess we kind of fit a description of drug dealers or something to that effect. So we were pulled over. Now, we weren't speeding, we weren't doing anything illegal, and we were pulled over. One state trooper pulled us over, and then they called like 2 other cars. So there was like, if I remember correctly, there was at least 5 or 6 like Highway State Patrol officers for my little brother and I. They asked they asked where we were going, gave us a series of questions. They asked if they could look in the vehicle. We said yes. We told them the only thing in the trunk of the car were speakers and some fishing poles. And that's exactly what was in there. We weren't doing anything illegal at all. And during the search, they decided to make sure that our stories align. So they took one of us into one of the cruisers. and questioned us. And then they took me in a cruiser and questioned us. And our stories lined up perfectly, but they let us go. I don't even believe we got a ticket or anything like that, which was interesting. But that was the first time or probably the wildest time that I can remember that the police actually like profiled us, and it just felt really. It just was really, really bad. You know, we couldn't call. We didn't have cell phones at the time, so we couldn't call our parents and let them know what was going on. So if something happened to us, you know, nobody would have known, you know, where we were at or what happened to us. We would end up in a jail somewhere. So it was just really bad. You know, we were all nervous. We're sweating. It's hot outside. It's like summer. And the second question is, how has your experience with law enforcement shaped your views on justice and fairness of America? It's not positive. I can tell you that much. Definitely not positive. So I think in that particular instance about being pulled over, racially profiled and pulled over as a teenager, I think definitely set the standard of how I kind of viewed law enforcement, police officers and the like. And then subsequently after that, you know, you kind of see more and more of these episodes or these interactions with police officers and law enforcement end up with people that look like me dead. So, you know, and for the smallest infractions, you know, either running or playing with a toy in a park, selling cigarettes on a outside of a store, like just the smallest little like interactions, the smallest things, misdemeanors. You know, we're not talking about big or huge crimes. We're just talking about like everyday. I mean, it could be jaywalking or something like that, and those instances, you know, could end up fatal. You know, so I don't, and especially with the, you know, with the internet now and video, and you're able to actually see and witness kind of what happened and in the moment, you know, with either cell phone video or body cam video, and it hasn't helped at all my view of law enforcement, you know, and being over policed, and the Black community being over policed. So definitely not. And the third question: have you ever felt the need to change your speech, dress, or mannerisms to avoid being stereotyped or profiled? And what does that say about the freedom of expression in your life? Absolutely. Absolutely. I think every African American goes through that. Like, you may change up your dialect, your speech patterns, your mannerisms, and the like, ultimately to have law enforcement see you a little bit differently, and to interact with you a little bit differently. And you know, for me, you know, that even, you know, was a choice in what kind of vehicles I drove. So for a long time, I would get like station wagons, like European station wagons, and or sport vehicles, as I like to call them, and simply because, you know, it was innocuous and benign, and I could drive through any neighborhood and no one would necessarily bat an eye at a station wagon driving by, or Mercedes station wagon driving by. So I felt it gave me a certain sort of freedom to go different places, as opposed to another vehicle that I would drive. So if I had something that they perceived as not being, you know, a part of that neighborhood or that environment or that area, you're more than likely going to get pulled over. I didn't want that. I don't want any interaction with you know, law enforcement on any level. And I still feel that today. Like the least amount of interaction that I have with law enforcement, the better. Like, and again, because that interaction, that time that you spend with that cop, that police officer, or whoever it is, like, it may turn fatal. And I think all African Americans, you know, think about those sorts of things when they have, when they run into, you know, a situation where they have to interact with law enforcement. So, yeah. So hopefully that answers your question.